Hello, Taurus. This energy feels very different. Someone here is starting to realize that your silence was never a game. It was a boundary. It was self-respect. And honestly, I feel like that's what is hitting them the hardest right now. Because for a long time, this person may have believed you would always be there. They thought there would always be another chance, another conversation, another opportunity to make things right. But something has shifted. Wow, they're beginning to see you from a completely different perspective. They're noticing the distance. They're noticing your absence. They're noticing what life feels like without your energy in it. And the question is, why did it take losing access to you for them to finally recognize your value? Why did it take your silence for them to hear everything you were trying to say? Somebody is doing a lot of reflecting right now, because deep down, they know this connection meant more than they were willing to admit. And for the first time in a long time, they're no longer focused on what they want. They're starting to think about what they lost. Let's see where this energy wants to take us. Something about this energy feels very quiet, but not empty. It feels like the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. As I'm sitting with these cards, I keep feeling someone looking back over their shoulder. Not because you called them. Not because you chased them. Not because you asked them to stay. They're looking back because they suddenly realize you're not standing where they left you. The first card that catches my attention is the Nine of Pentacles. And wow, there is something so different about your energy here. This doesn't feel like someone waiting by the phone. This doesn't feel like someone checking for signs or trying to force a connection back together. This feels like someone who got tired of carrying something alone. Someone who finally decided to put that energy back into themselves. I keep seeing you focusing on your own life, your own goals, your own peace. Not in a dramatic way, not to prove a point. Just because something inside you became exhausted from waiting for another person to figure out what they wanted. And here's what's interesting. The moment you stopped pulling on this connection, the moment you loosened your grip, somebody started paying attention. Funny how that happens. Because for a long time, I feel like this person believed your energy would always be available to them. Not because they were evil, not because they didn't care. They just became comfortable. Comfortable knowing you would understand. Comfortable knowing you would be patient. Comfortable knowing that somehow you would still be there. But the Queen of Pentacles doesn't feel available in the same way anymore. She feels grounded, present, focused. There's a warmth around her, but there are boundaries around that warmth too. And I feel like that's what this person is struggling to understand. Because they're looking at you now and realizing that your world didn't stop. Your life didn't pause. You kept growing. You kept building. You kept becoming more of yourself. And the strange thing is, the healthier you become, the more they notice your absence. I keep hearing this feeling of, wait, where did they go? Not physically, energetically. Because your attention isn't wrapped around them anymore. Your energy isn't constantly reaching toward them. And that shift feels much bigger than they expected. The Hermit appears and everything slows down. This card feels less like action and more like realization. Long quiet moments, long drives, long evenings where somebody has too much time to think. Because when distractions disappear, truth gets louder. And I feel like this person is starting to sit with things they avoided before. Memories, conversations, missed opportunities, moments where they could have spoken up, moments where they could have chosen differently. They're beginning to see the connection from a perspective they never allowed themselves to explore before. Okay, let's talk about something deeper. I don't think they're only noticing what they've lost. I think they're noticing who you've become. Those are two very different things. Losing someone hurts. Watching someone evolve without you can hit even harder. Because now they're seeing confidence where they expected hesitation. They're seeing peace where they expected sadness. They're seeing stability where they expected uncertainty. And part of them doesn't quite know what to do with that. The Six of Wands steps into the reading and suddenly I feel eyes everywhere. People noticing you, people appreciating you, people responding to your energy differently. You may not even realize it. You may be quietly handling your responsibilities, focusing on work, taking care of yourself, moving through life one day at a time. Yet somehow your presence feels louder than before, and this person notices it. They notice that other people notice you. They notice that your confidence isn't coming from attention, it's coming from within. And that creates a very different kind of attraction. There is a bittersweet feeling sitting here. Because the more they watch, the more they understand that you were never standing still. You were growing the entire time. The only difference is that now they're finally seeing it. They're finally understanding that your patience had limits. Your love had limits. Your willingness to wait had limits. Not because you stopped caring, because you started caring about yourself too. And as these cards settle on the table, I keep feeling this person standing at a distance, watching, thinking, questioning, trying to understand when everything changed, trying to understand why your energy feels different, trying to understand why the possibility of losing you suddenly feels so real. And honestly, I don't think they've found the answer yet. I think they're only beginning to ask the question. The feeling I'm getting is that something has become impossible to ignore. Not because somebody suddenly received all the answers. Not because a dramatic confession happened. It feels quieter than that. More personal, more uncomfortable. The kind of truth that slowly rises to the surface when a person can no longer distract themselves from it. As I look at the judgment card sitting here, I keep feeling somebody replaying old memories in their mind. Not the polished version. Not the version they told other people. The real version. The version they only see when they're being completely honest with themselves. And that's where things start to shift. Because I feel like this person spent a long time believing a story that was easier to accept. Maybe it protected their ego. Maybe it protected their fears. Maybe it helped them avoid difficult conversations. Whatever the reason was, it feels like they're beginning to question everything they once felt certain about. And wow, that realization isn't comfortable. Because the moment somebody starts asking different questions, they often arrive at very different answers. The Ace of Swords appears, and I can almost feel the mental fog starting to lift. Small details suddenly stand out. Conversations they brushed aside. Moments they misunderstood. Things you said that make more sense now than they did at the time. It's almost like pieces of a puzzle are finding their place without anyone forcing them together. And the strange thing is, the more clearly they see you, the harder it becomes to maintain the old narrative. Because I don't feel like this person is only rethinking what happened between the two of you. I feel like they're rethinking who you are. There may have been assumptions. There may have been opinions from other people. There may have been fears that distorted the way they viewed this connection. But none of those things feel as convincing anymore. Okay, this is where the energy becomes very interesting. The Justice card enters the reading, and suddenly I feel accountability. Not blame, not punishment, accountability. A quiet moment where someone realizes that some of their decisions were made without having all the facts. Some choices were influenced by emotions they never addressed. Some judgments were made before they truly understood the situation. And that realization carries weight, because it's one thing to feel confused. It's another thing entirely to realize you may have been wrong. I think that's what makes this so emotional. Not because they're discovering something shocking, because they're discovering something simple. You are not who they thought you were. Or perhaps you were exactly who you said you were all along. That thought keeps coming back. The Moon card feels especially powerful here, not in a dramatic way. More like standing in a dimly lit room and slowly noticing details that were always there. Nothing changed. The room didn't change. The truth didn't change. Only their ability to see it had changed. And that's a very different experience, because once a person sees something clearly, they can't really unsee it. I keep feeling moments where this individual finds themselves staring into space, thinking, reflecting, trying to understand how they missed certain things, trying to understand why they accepted certain stories without questioning them, trying to understand why your actions and your character never fully matched the conclusions they reached. And every answer seems to lead them back to the same place, back to you, back to the connection, back to the possibility that they misunderstood far more than they realized. Wow, there is humility in this energy, a softness. The defensive walls don't feel as strong anymore. The certainty doesn't feel as solid anymore. Instead, there is curiosity, a willingness to look deeper, a willingness to examine things from another angle. And honestly, that's where I feel the biggest transformation beginning. Not in what they say, not in what they do, in what they finally allow themselves to see. Because once somebody starts viewing the same story through a completely different lens, emotions begin to shift right along with it. And I keep feeling that happening here, slowly, quietly, one realization at a time. Almost as if they're standing at the edge of a truth they haven't fully stepped into yet, but they can already feel it changing everything. There is something about memory that refuses to stay buried when the heart finally starts telling the truth. And that's exactly where this energy seems to be moving. The Six of Cups appears, and suddenly the atmosphere feels softer, less focused on confusion, less focused on questions, more focused on remembering, not the fantasy, not the dream, the reality of what was shared between two people. I keep seeing someone revisiting ordinary moments, the moments that didn't seem important at the time, the conversations after a long day, the way you listened, the way you showed up, the way you made space for them without asking for recognition. It's strange because those memories don't feel dramatic. They feel simple, and somehow that's what makes them so powerful. Because the things this person misses aren't grand gestures. They're noticing the consistency, the reliability, the feeling of knowing somebody was genuinely there. And wow, that realization feels heavier than they expected. Because I think there was a time when they viewed your effort as something that would always exist. Almost like it was permanent. Almost like it required no appreciation because it would never disappear. But distance has a way of changing perspective. The absence of something valuable often teaches lessons that presence never could. The Five of Cups comes forward, and I can feel the emotional weight immediately. This card doesn't feel loud. It feels quiet. The kind of sadness that visits when nobody else is around. The kind of sadness that appears during random moments. Driving somewhere, making coffee, walking through a familiar place, and suddenly a memory appears. A memory attached to you. A memory attached to this connection. A memory attached to something they once overlooked. I don't feel like this person isn't only missing you. I feel like they're beginning to understand what they lost access to. Your patience, your support, your loyalty, the emotional safety you created around them. Things they may have noticed before, but never fully valued. And that distinction matters, because appreciation and understanding are not always the same thing. The King of Pentacles sits here, and I can't stop thinking about stability. The energy feels grounded, steady, dependable, not flashy, not performative, just real. And I think this person is finally recognizing how rare that actually is. Because genuine consistency isn't something people often appreciate while they have it. They notice it once it's gone. They notice it when life becomes noisier, when situations become uncertain, when the comfort they once relied on is no longer available. There is a feeling of comparison happening here, not with another person, with their own memories. They're comparing how life felt with your presence versus how it feels without it. And the difference is becoming difficult to ignore. Okay, this is where the reading becomes deeply emotional. Because the Lover's card arrives and the energy shifts straight into the heart. Not toward regret alone, toward understanding, toward recognition, toward the realization that this connection carried more meaning than they originally allowed themselves to admit. I keep hearing someone ask themselves a question, not out loud, inside. What if this mattered more than I thought? And once that question appears, it seems impossible to push away. Because every memory leads back to another memory. Every realization leads back to another realization. Every honest reflection seems to bring them closer to the same truth. You mattered. Your presence mattered. Your effort mattered. Your love mattered. And perhaps the hardest part of all, they're beginning to understand that many of the things they once considered ordinary were actually gifts. Gifts they assumed would always be there. Gifts they didn't fully recognize until they became memories. There is still hesitation here. Still uncertainty, still emotions they haven't completely processed. But the walls feel different now, less rigid, less defensive. Almost like this person's heart is slowly opening doors that have been closed for a very long time. And as those doors begin to open, more memories seem to be waiting on the other side. The feeling changes here. Not because the connection disappeared. Not because the emotions faded. If anything, they feel stronger now than they did before. And that's exactly what seems to be unsettling this person. The Nine of Swords appears, and immediately, I get the sense that somebody is carrying thoughts they can't seem to put down. Thoughts that arrive when everything becomes quiet. Thoughts that follow them into the night, into long drives, into empty moments when there is nothing left to distract them. I don't think they expected this. I don't think they expected your absence to stay with them the way it has. Because there is a difference between missing someone for a moment and realizing they have become part of your daily thoughts. And that realization feels impossible for them to ignore. I keep seeing them trying to focus on other things. Work, responsibilities, plans, conversations with other people. Yet somehow your name, your energy, or a memory connected to you finds its way back into their mind. Sometimes it's a song. Sometimes it's a place. Sometimes it's something as simple as hearing a phrase you used to say. And suddenly they're thinking about you again. Wow. The more they try to move forward without understanding these feelings, the louder those feelings seem to become. The Four of Swords enters the reading and everything slows down. This card feels like a pause, not an ending, a pause. A period where somebody is forced to sit with themselves, forced to listen to their own thoughts, forced to acknowledge emotions they have been trying to manage, suppress, or explain away. And I feel like that process is revealing something important. Because the more time they spend alone with their thoughts, the harder it becomes to convince themselves that this connection didn't matter. the harder it becomes to pretend that you've simply become another memory. You don't feel like a memory here, you feel present. That's what keeps standing out. Your energy doesn't feel locked in the past. It feels active, alive, still affecting them, still moving through their heart in ways they didn't expect. The Two of Cups appears, and suddenly the reading becomes very personal, very intimate, very honest. I keep feeling moments where this person compares every interaction they have to the connection they experienced with you. Not intentionally, it just happens. Certain conversations feel shallow. Certain experiences feel incomplete. Certain connections don't create the same sense of comfort they once felt around you. And that's when the comparison begins. Not because they're trying to hold on to the past, because their heart naturally remembers what felt meaningful. Okay, there is something vulnerable here. Something they haven't fully admitted to themselves yet. The possibility that moving away from you didn't make the feelings disappear. The possibility that distance never solved what they thought it would solve. The possibility that separation simply gave them a clearer view of what was already there. And honestly, that realization feels emotional. Because there comes a point where a person can no longer blame timing, can no longer blame circumstances, can no longer blame confusion. Eventually, they have to face what they truly feel. The star appears and the energy softens immediately, not with certainty, not with expectations, with hope. A quiet hope. The kind that appears when somebody begins imagining possibilities they once refused to consider. I keep seeing them wondering what you're doing, wondering if you're happy, wondering if you still think about them, wondering whether there is still a bridge between where things were and where they could be. And the strange thing is, these thoughts don't seem to be coming from loneliness. They seem to be coming from affection, from admiration, from a growing awareness that what they shared with you left a much deeper mark than they ever understood at the time. The heart has a way of revealing its truth when distance removes all the noise. And that's exactly what this feels like. A person sitting quietly with emotions that refuse to fade. A person realizing that every road they've tried to take somehow circles back to the same place, back to the same memories, back to the same connection, back to the same question they haven't fully answered yet. What if letting you go was never what they truly wanted? That question seems to linger in the air long after everything else becomes quiet. And the more this person sits with it, the less they can pretend they are unaffected. Because what I'm feeling now is movement, not rushed movement, not impulsive movement, the kind of movement that begins inside someone's heart long before anyone sees it on the outside. The Knight of Cups appears, and immediately I feel emotion trying to find its voice. For so long, this person may have been thinking, analyzing, questioning, trying to make sense of everything. But thoughts can only carry a person so far. Eventually, feelings begin asking for attention too. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here. I keep getting the image of someone rehearsing conversations in their mind, imagining what they would say if they had the opportunity, imagining how they would explain themselves, imagining how they would tell you things they should have said a long time ago, not because they suddenly have all the answers, because they no longer want silence to speak for them. There are words sitting in this person's heart, words that have been sitting there for quite some time, and the longer they remain unspoken, the heavier they seem to become. The Page of Cups feels incredibly vulnerable, almost innocent, almost nervous. I don't see someone feeling powerful here. I see someone feeling exposed. Because expressing emotions always carries a risk, especially when there has been distance, especially when mistakes were made, especially when they don't know how you feel anymore. That uncertainty seems to be one of their biggest fears, not whether they still care. That part feels clear. The fear is what happens if they reach out and discover that too much time has passed. The fear is hearing a different answer than the one they secretly hope for. The fear is realizing they may have waited longer than they should have. And wow, fear has a strange way of making people hesitate, even when their heart knows exactly where it wants to go. But hesitation doesn't feel as strong as it once did, because every card here seems to be pushing this person toward honesty, toward authenticity, toward saying what they truly feel instead of hiding behind assumptions. The Eight of Wands arrives, and suddenly the energy speeds up. Not in a chaotic way, in a way that feels inevitable. Like someone who has spent months standing at the edge of a diving board finally realizing they can't stand there forever. At some point, they either jump or walk away. And this person doesn't feel like they're walking away. I keep feeling moments where they reach for their phone. Moments where they start typing something. Moments where they wonder if they should send a message. Moments where they imagine hearing your voice again. There is anticipation here. A growing restlessness. A feeling that remaining silent is becoming harder than speaking. Okay, Something else stands out. This person doesn't only want communication, they want sincerity. They want whatever comes next to be real. And that's where the Ace of Pentacles feels important. Because this energy isn't showing me someone interested in repeating old cycles. They're thinking about what could actually be built, what could be repaired, what could be approached differently. The focus feels less like fantasy and more like possibility, less like wishing and more like intention. And I think that's surprising even to them. Because there was a period where fear seemed stronger than hope, a period where uncertainty seemed stronger than courage. Yet something has shifted, not perfectly, not completely, but enough that they're beginning to imagine a conversation instead of avoiding one. Enough that they're beginning to consider vulnerability instead of resistance. Enough that they're beginning to wonder whether honesty might finally create the clarity they've been searching for. There is still nervousness sitting around this energy, still hesitation, still questions, still a heart that occasionally remembers every reason to stay quiet. But those reasons don't seem to carry the same weight anymore, because another feeling is growing beside them. A feeling that keeps whispering that some connections deserve a chance to be spoken about, honestly. And as that feeling becomes stronger, it seems like this person is getting closer to a moment they've been approaching for a very long time. A moment where keeping everything inside may no longer feel possible. A different kind of calm settles over this reading. Not the calm that comes from having all the answers. The calm that comes from finally understanding your own value. And honestly, that's the energy surrounding you more than anything else. The world appears, and it feels like something inside of you has shifted permanently. Not because somebody chose you, not because somebody finally understood your worth, because you learned to recognize it for yourself. There is something incredibly powerful about reaching a point where your happiness no longer depends on another person's decision. And I feel that strongly here. You stop trying to carry the entire connection on your shoulders. You stop convincing, explaining, proving, waiting. The energy feels lighter because you're no longer holding responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. And that's important, because I keep feeling this person moving through their own lessons, their own realizations, their own growth, not because anyone forced them, because life eventually asks all of us to face ourselves honestly. The Strength card feels beautiful here, not dramatic, not loud, quiet strength. The kind that develops after disappointment, the kind that develops after heartbreak, the kind that develops when somebody survives something that once felt impossible. I don't feel bitterness around you. I don't feel revenge. I don't feel the need to teach anyone a lesson. What I feel is self-respect. And those two things are very different. Because self-respect doesn't chase. Self-respect doesn't beg. Self-respect doesn't abandon itself to keep someone else comfortable. Wow. There is something very attractive about that energy. Not because you're trying to attract anyone, because authenticity naturally creates its own magnetism. And I think this person feels that. The more they reflect on everything that happened, the more they realize they are the ones standing at a crossroads. Now you are no longer standing there waiting for instructions. You are no longer putting your life on hold. You are living, growing, moving forward. And that realization creates responsibility. Because if somebody wants access to your world again, they cannot simply wish for it. They have to show up differently. The 10 of Pentacles arrives, and I immediately feel a shift away from temporary emotions, away from fleeting excitement, away from uncertainty. This feels more mature than that, more grounded than that. The energy keeps asking one question: what can actually be built here? Not what can be imagined, not what can be promised, what can be built. And that's why this person's actions seem more important than their words. Because words are easy, intentions are easy, feelings are easy to talk about. Creating something meaningful requires consistency. It requires effort. It requires accountability. I think that's one of the biggest lessons surrounding this connection. Love isn't only what someone feels. Love is what someone chooses to do with those feelings. And that understanding seems to be growing inside both of you in different ways. The Hierophant appears, and suddenly the energy feels wiser, more settled, more intentional. I keep feeling two people who have learned things through experience that they couldn't have learned any other way. Lessons about communication, lessons about patience, lessons about boundaries, lessons about what truly matters. And those lessons feel valuable because growth changes the way people approach each other. It changes the questions they ask. It changes the choices they make. One thing I want to say here is that you don't have to rush anything. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to chase clarity. You don't have to chase anyone. The energy surrounding you feels like someone who understands that what belongs in their life will meet them halfway. And honestly, that perspective changes everything. because the focus is no longer on whether someone returns. The focus is on whether they arrive with the maturity, honesty, and consistency necessary to create something different than before. And as these cards settle across the table, I keep feeling this quiet sense of possibility. Not certainty, not pressure, possibility. A path that only opens if both people are willing to walk it with the same level of intention. And somewhere within that space, I feel someone preparing to show you exactly how much they've learned. And that's where we're going to leave this reading for today. Whatever part of this message resonated with you, take only what feels right for your journey and leave the rest. What I keep coming back to in this reading is the reminder that you don't have to chase what is meant to meet you halfway. You don't have to convince someone of your value. You don't have to carry a connection by yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is continue building your own life, protecting your peace, and allowing people to show you who they truly are through their actions. Okay, if someone wants to be part of your world, they will eventually have to step forward with honesty, effort, and consistency. And if they do, you'll be able to decide what feels right for you from a very different place than before. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. Take good care of yourselves, keep following your own path, and keep choosing the things that bring you peace. And until we meet again, bye for now.